Hello, and welcome to the FY 2021 Senior Corps RSVP Competition Best Practices in Budget Development Training. My goal for today's session is to help you, the RSVP grant applicant, acquire the knowledge and skills needed to understand the function of and develop an effective RSVP budget and budget narrative. Your submission of a complete and high-quality budget will help demonstrate that you have the fiscal capacity to manage an RSVP program. During this session, I will holistically review the components of an RSVP budget, which includes both CNCS resources and the applicant's matching resources. At the end of this recording, you should understand how to determine if costs are allowable, reasonable, necessary, and allocable as determined by 2 CFR 200, the Office of Management and Budget's Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards, frequently referred to as the Uniform Guidance. Using this information and the tips and best practices shared here, you should be prepared to submit a compliant and competitive budget. Because the budget and budget narrative becomes part of the grant recipient's contract with CNCS, we want and expect applicants to present a strong and accurate document. The approved budget will not only serve as a financial guide for grant-supported activities, but it helps to ensure the terms and conditions of the award. In addition to helping CNCS monitor grant and financial compliance, it can serve as a tool for both CNCS and award recipients to measure progress toward the match requirements and monitor budgeted expenses to actual expenses as part of the budget management process. Before we dive into the details of budget development, I want to point out that budget development is just one component of an effective budget management process. Let's take a quick look at the full process. As you started to work on your RSVP application, you may have asked yourself, how do I design a strong budget? Whether you actually started the process with that question or not, as part of the pre-award project development process, it's likely that you and your team already determined the needs you wanted to address with RSVP resources. You set up program or project goals and objectives, and you decided on a strategy to accomplish those goals. To develop the budget, applicants must then translate that strategy into dollars to prepare a budget that is aligned with the stated program goals and objectives. Post-award, grantees will continue to manage their budgets effectively by establishing a budget control process, monitoring expenses, that is, regularly comparing your budgeted to actual expenses to check for over and underspending, and then modifying the budget as necessary with approval from CNCS when required. Today's conversation will focus on that budget preparation process. Let's talk about an approved budget. It should be realistic. That is, it should reflect expected program revenues and expenses and its capacity to carry out program activities. It should be consistent and aligned with the program's needs and objectives, and it should be flexible. A project's financial and operating circumstances often change, and that budget must adapt to those changing circumstances. For now, we'll focus on the realistic and consistent features as they relate to budget design. A few minutes ago, I outlined the steps that you and your team may have taken as part of the budget development process. CNCS encourages applicants to approach budget design as a team activity, engaging various departments based on their individual expertise. For instance, human resources will have salary, fringe, and criminal history check costs. The program office may know the costs for training and evaluation and delivering services to the community. The accounting office should have those historical spending rates that you can use for specific costs. And the grants office should be able to review for compliance, and certainly other staff may have additional expertise and can review the budget for clarity. I realize if you're part of a small organization, you may not have all those resources available to you, but you shouldn't undertake budget development in a vacuum without input from others. Don't be afraid to involve as many other people as is required to present the most realistic data in the budget and to make sure the document aligns with your programmatic goals and objectives. You may also want to have someone outside your budget development team review the budget just to make sure that the content is clear and accurate. CNCS recommends that applicants use that historical information whenever it is possible. And as a reminder, your accounting department should have that information. And then just make adjustments as necessary so that the data is more timely, and include that information as appropriate as part of your budget narrative descriptions. Your strong budget design provides a framework for effective budget management, and it ensures a realistic scope, appropriate detail, a competitive proposal, compliance, and effective delivery. That is, it serves as a guide for program implementation. In order to create a budget that is strong, accurate, and requires minimal clarification, I encourage you to take your time and engage others in data collection and quality review. As previously noted, one of the objectives for this session is to provide you with tips and tools for creating a competitive budget narrative. The first tip is to read and follow the instructions in the NOFO and the application instructions. The strongest and most compliant budget narratives adhere to these guidelines, and it saves all of us time and effort later. I also encourage you to become familiar with the uniform guidance and only include those costs that are allowable, reasonable, necessary, and allocable. You will find the uniform guidance online at ecfr.gov under Title II Grants and Agreements. After you and your team estimate the financial resources you need to achieve the stated program goals, you will then organize them into the narrative's budget categories, again following the guidance in the NOFO and the application instructions. As you develop the narrative, remember to provide adequate descriptions and clear calculations. eGrants will automatically populate a budget summary and budget narrative report that should be able to serve as a standalone document without a need to reference the application narrative for explanation. This is where that suggestion to have someone outside the budget development team review the document to check for holes and inaccuracies comes in handy. The uniform guidance, as well as the NOFO and the application instructions, specify costs considered unallowable, such as lobbying, entertainment, and alcoholic beverages. CNCS strongly encourages applicants to review the uniform guidance to avoid including unallowable costs in your proposed budget. Other unallowable costs include those that are not necessary to meet the program objectives. For example, budgeting new laptop computers for your 8 staff members when only 2 staff are identified in the RSVP budget is not allowable, and it could be considered waste, fraud, or abuse. Another example is budgeting $4,000 for a top-of-the-line desktop computer with all kinds of fancy peripherals for an employee who will primarily use a word processing program and email. These are costs that would be considered unreasonable from a prudent person perspective, or that have no logical basis for inclusion in the budget. It's important to remember that if a cost is unallowable as part of the CNCS share, it is also unallowable as part of the grantee share, or your required match. As shown on the visual, the grantee share of total costs increases over the first 3 years of program operations to a maximum of 30% of total grant costs. For example, if you have a $100,000 program budget, in year 1 the grantee share must be at least $10,000. In year 2, the minimum grantee share increases to $20,000, and in year 3 and thereafter, the grantee share of that same $100,000 budget must be at least $30,000. It's important to note that cash and in-kind contributions are acceptable as match when they are necessary and reasonable for proper and efficient accomplishment of project or program objectives, when they are allowable under the uniform guidance and application instructions, when they are included in the approved budget and allowable under program guidelines, when they are compliant with the terms and conditions of the award and the uniform guidance, and when they are verifiable from the organization's records. The matching resources must be treated the same as the CNCS share, and consistent treatment includes complete and accurate documentation. A frequently heard phrase in the world of grants management is, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So please make sure to document all your expenses. Because applicants must demonstrate an adequate plan for non-CNCS support, they're required to include the source of these matching resources in the budget narrative, entering a description of the source along with the amount, a cash or in-kind classification, the type of match source, that is whether it's state or local government, federal funds, or private donations, and a confirmation of whether the source of matches are secured or proposed. Now, you don't need to secure 100% of your match prior to submitting the application, but your anticipated match must be included, and the total in this section must equal the amount of match shown in the budget. Also, please note that eGrants rounds the budgeted match up to the nearest percentage. For example, a budget with 29.7% match will appear to match at 30%. I always recommend that applicants calculate the percentage outside of eGrants to ensure that you are meeting or exceeding the required percentage. As you enter data into your budget, you will notice that it includes both the CNCS and grantee share of project costs. Additionally, the budget is divided into two different sections. Section 1 is for volunteer support expenses, which include both direct and indirect cost categories. The direct costs in this section include grant-related program operating costs. Specific line items may include those shown on the slide. This section may also include general or centralized organizational expenses that are spread across the entire organization as indirect costs. Section 2 of the RSVP budget is for direct volunteer expenses. As the section heading states, this includes all reimbursable expenses incurred for the volunteers rather than the program operations during the course of their grant-related activities, including those shown on the slide. As you, the RSVP applicant, develop your budget management systems and specifically the budget control process, you will want to establish clear policies and procedures for tracking and documenting these expenses. We will now review the specific budget categories and the related guidance in the RSVP application instructions, beginning with Section 1, the volunteer support expenses. The first category under Section 1 is the personnel expenses, in which you will individually list each staff position supported by the grant and provide the annual salary and the level of effort as a percentage of the FTE devoted to this award. Or, if calculated on an hourly basis, you will enter the hourly rate and number of hours per week. Please remember to only include positions supported by the application narrative and make sure not to include the value of direct community service performed by volunteers unless it is for organizational functions such as accounting or auditing or training. In addition, if you have multiple CNCS grants, it's a good idea to confirm that you are not over budgeting, that is, including more than 100% of staff time on your budgets. And you can do this by just including a statement in each line or at the end of the section that states the percentage of time allocated to budgeted staff does not exceed 100% across all CNCS grants. As we move into Category B, the personnel fringe benefits, you will identify the type of fringe benefit, for example, FICA, health and life insurance, retirement, state unemployment, workers' compensation, and the like, and you'll include the cost for each staff. Your fringe benefit cost should align with the salary lines. That is, it should only include that staff included in the personnel expenses section, and those costs should be calculated in alignment with the calculations. Further, if the benefit amount is more than 30% of salary costs, you must list the benefits separately and justify the cost. For example, you might say health insurance at 24%, retirement at 10%, and FICA at 7.65%. When you move to the travel section, you will notice that it is divided into local travel, that is travel within the project service area as shown in item 12 of the 424 face sheet, and your your long distance travel, which is that travel that occurs outside of the service area. In both sections, the cost should include the purpose of travel and the type of travel cost, whether it's ground transportation or airfare, lodging, per diem. You'll also want to include the number of trips and the number of staff traveling. Make sure the calculation is clear and simple to follow, and only include travel costs for staff listed under the budgeted category A and who directly support the grant activities described in your application. You may budget mileage at a rate higher than the federal reimbursement rate if that follows your organization's policy and it's justified in the budget narrative. And you can justify that just by making a statement in there that says the mileage rate is based on organizational policy, or words to that effect. Equipment is defined as tangible, non-expendable personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year and an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more per unit. If less, the expense goes into the supplies section. You must show the unit cost and the number of units with the purpose of the equipment. Likewise, you must show the type of supplies in section E and their respective costs, and individually list any single items costing $1,000 or more. The contractual and consultant services category includes all contractual and consultant services, and you will itemize each contract or consultant and provide a brief justification of the need. This section should include any service documented by a contract, such as equipment maintenance, accounting services, and training consultants. Section 1I is the other volunteer support costs and category, and that's kind of a catch-all category for those projected expenses that don't neatly fit into the other categories. In this section, you must include your national service criminal history checks for employees or other individuals who receive a salary or similar payment from the grant. And if the costs for those checks are not included, please make sure to explain how those costs are covered or that the checks were already completed. This section may also include line items to cover costs for training, evaluation services, recruitment expenses, and other expenses that just don't neatly fit into sections A through F. In addition to these direct costs, section 1 includes a section for indirect costs. So indirect costs are those general or centralized costs that support the project. They do not include specific project costs. They may be included in an organization's indirect cost rate agreement if one exists, or calculated using a de minimis rate. Let's take a few minutes to look at those calculations. As I said, there are two methods for calculating indirect costs in an RSVP budget. If an applicant has a federally approved indirect cost rate, they must use this method, and the approved rate agreement constitutes documentation of the administrative costs. Be sure to specify the cost type, that is whether it's provisional, predetermined, fixed, or final, and supply the rate and base on which it's calculated. For example, it might be all salaries, or salaries and fringe, or all direct costs. You'll then follow the guidance in the application instructions to calculate the maximum allowed. And if you're budgeting for less than the maximum, please note the percentage claimed in the description. Applicants must also enter the details of their approved negotiated indirect cost rate agreement in eGrants using the guidance in the application instructions. And please make sure that the budgeted rate matches the rate details in eGrants. Organizations that never at any point in time held a federally negotiated indirect cost rate and who receive less than $35 million in direct federal funding may indefinitely use a de minimis rate of 10% of modified total direct costs. It's important to note that if this option is elected, the organization must use it consistently across all of the organization's federal awards. Specific guidance for calculating the indirect costs are in the application instructions. And as an alternative to using either of these methods, applicants may charge these costs as direct costs, providing that they meet the allowability standards outlined in the uniform guidance and the application instructions. Let's move on to Section 2, which focuses on volunteer expenses. Section 2 of an RSVP budget includes just one budget category. That's Section 2A, Other Volunteer Costs. This category is pre-populated with lines for meals, uniforms, insurance, recognition, and travel. You will enter the associated costs for these line items in the same manner you did for Section 1, including details such as the number of individuals covered, the cost per item, the mileage rate, whatever other information you need to justify the expense. Please remember that insurance for volunteers when on assignment is a required line item. Volunteers may also be reimbursed for costs incurred while performing their assignments, such as transportation and supplies, as long as the costs are outlined in the memorandum of agreement or of understanding negotiated with the volunteer station where the volunteer is serving. The last section of the budget narrative is the source of funds section. In it, you won't list budget sections or line item costs. Rather, you will enter the source of those resources that are covering the specific line item expenses in the grantee share of your budget. On the Budget Section 1 and Budget Section 2 headings, you will find a link to enter the source of matching funds, as shown here. Once you click that link, a new screen will open for you to enter the source. In this block, you will enter the source of matching resources separately, including a brief description of the match, whether it is secured or proposed, the dollar amount of the resources, the match classification, that is whether it's cash or in-kind resources, and the source type. Is it private funding? Is it coming from state or local government or elsewhere? And you'll enter that for your entire match, entering each line separately. When finished, please make sure that the total amount of resources included in the source of funds field matches the total amount included in the grantee share of the budget narrative exactly. You should be aware that there is a source of funds category for both Section 1 and Section 2 of the budget, and so you'll use either or both depending on where your budgeted resources are included in the grantee share. I caution you to update this section as well as the indirect cost section after making any budget revisions so that they reflect all changes. The total in this section must equal the total amount of budgeted match exactly. When complete, the source of funds section might include content similar to this example. Note that this only includes the source of match, not the specific sections or line items covered by the matching resources. And it provides the required details, noting whether the resources are secured or proposed, in-kind or cash donations, and provided by a private or a government entity. And as long as we're discussing matching resources, I want to caution you that if a cost is unallowable as part of the CNCS share, it is also unallowable as part of the grantee share or your required match. Again, if you're not sure if a cost is allowable or not, the uniform guidance is the best place to find the answer. This is also a good time to discuss the excess funds column that applicants may use to reflect the amount of grantee share resources provided in excess of the required percentage. Applicants are not required to utilize the excess column, but they may do so if they choose to. This column may include the cost of activities, such as fundraising, that are unallowable on the grant budget. The source of the excess funds should not be included in this source of funds section. Before we close, I want to offer a few pointers, beginning with guidance to check and double check your work to eliminate erroneous information. The NOFO and application instructions outline any budget restrictions and regulations. Please make sure to follow them. Your budget should include all required costs, such as costs for staff and volunteer National Service criminal history checks, and transportation, recognition, and insurance costs for volunteers. Check to make sure that your budget includes the minimum required match and that the source of matching funds section is detailed and aligned with the amount of budgeted match. As much as possible, due to eGrant's character limits, the budget narrative should provide details, including the purpose and accurate calculations in whole dollars, and it should exclude any unallowable costs, both those unallowed in this competition and those unallowed by the regulations. I often recommend that applicants use a $0 line item if they need to enter additional clarifications that eGrants will not permit due to the character limits. And please remember to have someone else check all your calculations before you submit. Finally, and most importantly, you should ensure that you align your budget narrative to the program goals in the application narrative, including miscellaneous, contingency, and undefined budget amounts may adversely impact your application status. And again, I will stress the benefit of involving your team as well as someone outside of your team in the budget development and review process. Having another set of eyes provide a review of that final budget can make an incredible difference. In addition, before submitting your application, please make sure your organization has an active registration with the System for Award Management. If you are applying to SAM for the first time, I recommend that you apply early as it may take a while to activate the registration. And be aware that this is a free service. Organizations should never, ever pay for a SAM registration. If required, make sure to submit your organization's operational and financial management survey to CNCS. And please make sure that your organization's most recent single audit is on file with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse and your Form 990 is submitted to GuideStar if applicable. And finally, if you have one, please make sure to enter your current federally negotiated indirect cost rate details in eGrants. Details for all of these actions are in the NOFO and the application instructions. Finally, CNCS is aware that on occasion applicants experience challenges with the eGrant system. eGrants automatically performs a limited compliance check to validate the budget, and it may result in a warning or error message. Some of these messages prevent you from submitting your application, so you should be aware of the differences and the related actions. For instance, when you receive a warning, you can move forward, but the application or budget may not be compliant with the guidelines. On the other hand, an error message will not allow you to move forward until you correct the error, and you must resolve all errors before you can submit your application. If you experience a challenge other than a warning or an error message, you should contact the National Service Hotline right away. The number is 800-942-2677, and a link to the help request form is at the bottom of most eGrants pages. I want to draw your attention back to these bullets that I shared earlier. I encourage you to keep this checklist nearby as you develop your budget and frequently consult it as a budget development guide and quality assurance checklist. Many budgets require extensive revisions, in part because applicants do not follow the points outlined here. You will save yourself a great deal of follow-up effort by checking your proposed budget against this checklist before submitting it to CNCS. I hope you found this instruction a helpful guide for developing your RSVP budget and budget narrative. I encourage you to review the content from this presentation several times before submitting your application as part of your quality assurance process. And I wish you the best of luck in this RSVP competition.